The current political standoff in Mozambique following the disputed elections and the security situation in the Eastern DRC will feature high on the agenda of SADC leaders. The regional bloc is hosting an extraordinary summit in Zimbabwe, Harare. South Africa is represented by Deputy President Paul Mashatile. Khayelihle Khumalo joins us live in studio to share a bit more on this extraordinary summit. Khayelihle, as always, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's start with just sentiment in the region. What is the expectation from many, especially when we look at the topical issues, being Mozambique, the political standoff there? What is the general sentiment? Are people actually pinning their hopes on these leaders having something very strong to say and being firm, decisive, stating that perhaps there needs to be some sort of a truce, there needs to be a recount, or even heading back to elections?
I think there's a great deal of expectation, Fundo. First and foremost, I mean, we saw from the human rights activists who are saying that primarily what SADC should have done in this instance is to send an envoy to Maputo to try and assess the situation. And then the heads of states have an opportunity to talk about this particular issue, especially in light of that address that you have seen from Mozambican President Nyusi, talking about calm, but also saying that he's willing to meet with all the four presidential candidates, including Mr. Mondlane, who has been a face of these demonstrations. And also have seen the announcement that he made around the issue of mourning for 3 days in light of these fatalities. But I mean, so far we do understand that about 4 heads of states are attending this particular summit. So already others, they are asking questions about the gravity of the situation, where the leaders really should have prioritized this issue in terms of making sure that there is a long-lasting solution, especially for a country like Mozambique. I mean, this is a country that really knows the consequences of the war.
Now, President Nyusi is going to be representing the country at the extraordinary summit. He has spoken or extended the invite to these 4 presidential candidates on the eve of the extraordinary summit. What has been the reception on the ground? Are they perhaps thinking he's playing to the gallery, or they feel that this is genuine? It was the opportune time just before the summit sits for him to be extending the invite to say, let us speak and come up to some, or arrive at some sort of a solution for peace.
It's been really interesting to see the developments from Mozambique, because, I mean, for example, we've seen once again the supporters of Mr. Mondlane almost regrouping, where we've seen those pots and pans sort of, you know, just protests where they really show their dismay, especially because, in as far as SADC is concerned, obviously they're very much perturbed about these set of events that you have seen in Mozambique, especially because, I mean, overall, the idea around SADC is all about making sure that they try to have peace in the region. Whenever you have a hotspot, it's always just a point of concern. In fact, a short while ago, the executive secretary of SADC, Mr. Alice Makhosi, said it is a point of concern what is happening in Mozambique, especially because it's quite important for the aggrieved parties to approach the lawful means in terms of expressing their displeasure.
But when we look at history around this regional body, there's been a lot of criticism that ever so often when there's conflict in the region, they tend to almost emphasize the sovereignty or autonomy of a country and almost push for warring parties within that country to resolve the matter themselves. So is there honestly hope this time around that we will not see a regional body that chooses to be quite diplomatic and almost again giving the people of Mozambique the space to resolve this matter by themselves?
I think that's one of the major challenges of structures like SADC, because bureaucracy comes into the way, the whole issue around sovereignty, the whole issue of non-interference into the domestic affairs. It's always a very major issue, especially given really the track record of SADC, how it has really addressed some issues really that are facing the region, especially because another issue that is facing the leaders is the current situation in the eastern part of the DRC. This is a long-standing issue. As much as we saw the deployment of the troops, there has been a ceasefire that was activated, but from time to time we've seen the violation of that ceasefire, of course, achieved through the concerted efforts by the Angolan president, João Lourenço, through the Luanda process. So it's always a major issue as to how do they really get so agile in addressing the regional concerns to avoid the escalation in the region?
The region has been quite busy insofar as elections are concerned. We even heard in that package, we had Botswana not so long ago, it was Mozambique, Mauritius, and now on the 27th of November, there's Namibia that will also head to the elections. But what we've seen with these elections is that opposition has really risen to the occasion. And in some of these instances here, they changed the government of the day. The likes of Boko will now be included at the SADC Extraordinary Summit because he's been inaugurated, so he's hitting the ground running. Is there perhaps even there, just on the ground, an expectation that perhaps there would be some sort of a reinvigoration of a SADC and just their views or how they respond to issues on the region?
I think it's always quite interesting when you observe these developments, the sweeping changes that you have seen, BDP being booted out of power after 58 years and almost this new leader emerging from Botswana. And in fact, he's really attending the proceedings in Harare. I think there's a great deal of expectations in terms of these new crop of leaders. But I mean, obviously, whenever you look at how the former liberation movements at times, they will approach certain issues. There's almost that perception that they always want to close ranks. They always want to say, we want to maintain.
More cautious, yes.
Very much so. There's always that soft approach. But, I mean, for example, from the opposition parties in Mozambique, a lot of them, they've been saying that with the new leaders coming into the fore, they're really expecting these changes, that perhaps SADC may change how it's really doing things. But obviously a great deal of expectations, especially in as far as the mission in the DRC is concerned. We know that its mandate will expire on the 14th of December. Will they renew the mandate? It remains to be seen. In all likelihood, they're going to renew it because you still do have pockets of insecurity in the DRC. A very huge issue for the region because this is one of the richest countries. You do have the cobalt, all these sorts of minerals, but we're not really seeing peace prevailing there.
And they're not realizing their economic potential because of the great instability. Khayelihle, as always, thank you very much for joining us. That's SABC News reporter Khayelihle Khumalo, just taking us through some of the matters that will top the agenda at the Extraordinary Summit that's currently underway.